Welcome back to the Ubuntu podcast. It's Wednesday, the 17th of May. And in Season 10, Episode 11, we're going to discuss what's been happening in the news and community. I'm Martin, and joining me this week are Mark.
Hello, hello.
Hello, and Alan.
Hello, you.
Hello, how is everyone?
Tickety-boo.
None too shabby.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that you're tickety-boo and none too shabby, but what have you been up to, Mark?
I have been getting a little bit older.
Oh, how much older?
1 year.
1 whole year.
You're catching me up
quickly. I'm sure we spoke last week. And how many? Oh, you don't have to answer that. You never ask a lady her name, her name, her age. Oh, I almost nailed it. So, what did you do for your birthday?
Went and played some pool and had some drinks at our local metal bar, and then went and had dinner and had some ice cream in a local ice cream cafe.
Party hard.
Party hard.
Nice.
Yes. And I got some nice peanut butter chocolate truffle things, which I'm currently eating, and they're delicious.
I'm much jealous about the peanut butter truffles, I have to say. Alan, what have you been up to?
Well, a little while ago, I sent off my Sinclair Spectrums to be repaired and refurbished because they were old and crusty and they needed to work. And I sent them off to...
they needed to work?
They needed work.
They needed work.
In order to become able to work, yes.
Right.
And I sent them off to a guy who was recommended to me on Twitter. And I sent him an email and said, look, I've got these broken Spectrums. And he replied with all the right words that made me think he was a respectable person who would fix my Spectrums. And I packaged them all up in a cardboard box with loads of bubble wrap and stuff and sent them off to him. And he had them for about a month or so. And when he received them, he told me and said he's got a bit of a queue of them. So, mine's in the queue. And then every so often he would ping me and say, what the status was of them. It was quite nice. It was like having like sending a pet away to the vet and having the vet tell you, exactly what's wrong with them and how they're going to treat them, and not quite as expensive as a vet, but getting up there.
So is this guy's job just refurbishing old Spectrums?
I don't know if it's his job or whether it's a part-time activity, but he does the electrical work, and his wife, I think, does the QA. So she gets to play Spectrum games on lots and lots of different Spectrums that he repairs. So I got them back this week, and I was so delighted unwrapping. I mean, they were wrapped up so well. Each of the 4 Spectrums were wrapped up in 4 layers of bubble wrap each inside a box. They were really lovingly taken care of. They were nice and clean, and they've also been what's called composite modded. For people who like old 8-bit computers, they will know that the video output of an old computer is often a modulated signal that you would plug in the aerial socket of your TV, or you'd have to plug into a splitter and then into the TV aerial socket. But these are modded so that you can plug them into a composite port, which makes the signal cleaner and works with lots of modern TVs and stuff. So it's been composite modded, and it's come back, and I've played a few Spectrum games on it, on my TV, on my desk, and it looks amazing.
I think it's amazing that a cottage industry like this exists 30 odd years after these devices were on the market.
Yeah, I dug out my the joystick because I have a thing that plugs in the back of the Spectrum called a Div MMC, which is basically an SD card reader, but also has a Kempston joystick port in the back, a 9-pin D style. So you plug old style joysticks into it. And I just looked at my joystick, which for those in the know is a Konix Speed King handheld joystick. And I just mentioned it to Mark.
A classic.
Yes. And it turns out it's 3 years older than Mark is. So... that makes me feel really, really old.
Here's a question. Do you find that your gaming performance is improved using a proper joystick?
So I was sat next to Sam. He sat here on my desktop PC playing some kind of brand new Lego game under Steam, and I'm sat playing Hypersports from the past. And he was like, "Wow, is that all the games you used to play?" And I was playing it, and actually I haven't played it for a long time, and I was really good. I got, I was first place in swimming, and I got a good score in the archery and the duck shooting and stuff. Yeah.
You're brave subjecting a 30-year-old joystick to that kind of abuse.
Yeah, well, it's pretty robust. But yes, that's what I've been doing.
Should we get on with it then?
Yep. Now it's time for some news. What's first up in the news, Mark?
Well, Microsoft have announced that Ubuntu and some other Linux distributions are soon going to be available via the Windows Store.
Ooh.
So this is the Windows subsystem for Linux, which we've spoken about before, sometimes called Bash on Windows. And yeah,
a lot of people like to bash on Windows, don't they? Hey.
Anyway, so yeah, basically they're packaging them up in whatever kind of packaging they do. To make them available via the Windows Store. So there's going to be Ubuntu, Fedora, and openSUSE.
Interesting. So I think a couple of shows ago we talked about the Windows S operating system and how that was going to work. And one of the features is that you can only install software from the Windows Store. So that means that these distros will be available on Windows S.
Sounds like it.
That would be, I mean, so for people who buy Windows S-based laptops, I guess students, maybe people who might not have like the income to buy a super expensive laptop, so want a lower price device, they would still be able to install this stuff and get like a geeky shell window on their Windows machine.
And be able to complete their coursework in their, network administration courses and things like that, if that's what you're studying. And since we talked about Windows S, I think the Microsoft laptop was like $1,000 thereabouts. But I think HP have announced a line of Windows S laptops that are like in the $250 to $300 mark.
Wow.
Uh-huh.
So more Chromebook style.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, what do you think? Is this going to harm the in air quotes Linux desktop by Windows having all of these distros available in the store?
It's not the full distro, though, really, is it? I mean, you can argue that it is. It is Ubuntu because the version of cowsay that you run in that window is the same bit for bit binary as the cowsay that I have on my pure Ubuntu laptop, right? So it is Ubuntu and they are the same things and they're built in Launchpad and they're managed by the same people in the repositories, but it's not the full Ubuntu experience. You're not going to get Unity desktop or GNOME Shell desktop. I guess you could fudge it and, get some type of Ubuntu experience in there somehow, but really that's not what it's designed for. If you really want a desktop and you want to be able to run, like I look at my desktop right now, I'm running, Chrome, Mumble, audio recorder, terminal, all kinds of other like Linuxy stuff in the background. If you want to run all of that, then, nuke your system and run a proper Linux distribution, whichever one you choose. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, this is more like the equivalent of running stuff under Wine on a Linux desktop. It's not like you've got a full Windows OS and you don't have the same hardware support underneath it. It's just you've got like the applications running on top of whatever your base OS is.
Yeah, and of course there's one critical element that's actually missing from these distributions, and that's that of course there is no Linux kernel.
Right, so it's not Linux.
Yeah, it's not actually Linux. It's just the user space for each of those distros, which means that you can do an awful lot of stuff. But I imagine you're going to start to run out of rope when you want to do more complex things, especially considering how popular containerization is, and none of those container primitives are going to exist in these user space distributions of these OSs at the moment. So,
although it is interesting what you can. I mean, you say you get limited. This week, shameless plug. I had a go at building snaps inside WSL Bash on Windows. and it works. I can run Snapcraft and build a Linux application into a Snap on a Windows system. So the argument that, if someone's using Windows and we give them all of these things inside Windows, it takes away from them needing a Linux installation. Well, what are we taking away from that Windows developer? A VM, maybe? A remote server, maybe? They're not, if they're a Windows developer and they're developing applications and they want to port them to Linux, they're not just going to nuke their entire laptop and install Linux just to port their application.
I've said before, I can see a lot of, plus points to having this available. I'd have loved to have had something like this in previous roles. Mark, you're using Windows at work. Have you got round to using WSL yet?
We are not on Windows 10 yet.
Oh, sad face.
I'm hoping, especially the fact that this is now, you're not going to have like special developer settings turned on. It's just, a standard app which you can install from the Windows Store. So I'm hoping that that's going to mean that when we do move to Windows 10, us just being able to say, well, we're using that instead of our current Sigwin MSys Git solution.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of when I was wanting to have access to something like this. Maintaining Sigwin and MinGW is hard work.
So speaking of things that are not Linux, Martin.
Android.
Exactly.
Android have announced Treble. And this is a project designed to provide a stable vendor interface for their mobile operating system. And this is trying to address one of the criticisms that Android has run into, in that you're unable to get regular updates for all of the devices from all of the vendors all of the time, because there's so many moving parts. People, the device manufacturers and the carriers can't keep pace with the rate of change. So this is an effort to separate the low level components of Android from all of the user interface stuff, so that all of the Android user interface, all of the top layer of the stack, can all be upgraded independently of what sits beneath it.
Does remind you of anything?
It does, doesn't it?
What? Linux?
No, it reminds me of Ubuntu Touch.
Oh, I see. I was thinking more like the general like Linux experience we've had for many years, where you have, a library for this and a library for that, and all of these things are individual debs or RPMs or whatever, and those are individually upgradable, and you don't upgrade the entire stack in one big hit. And
this sounds specifically like it's like a layered approach. So you have the sort of hardware enablement bit from the manufacturer sitting below the stuff that comes from the Android project, which is the Android OS, and then there's like a set interface between the two, so that means that they can basically release a new version of Android and the manufacturer can just sort of run the test suite with their hardware stuff underneath and check that it still works, and then push an update, rather than having to rewrite their whole hardware enablement thing to cope with the new updates to Android.
When is this supposed to land? When will we see
I think Android O.
Yeah.
Which is the next one?
Yes.
I imagine.
The beta went live today. The Google I/O event is happening right now, and they announced that betas of Google O are live today.
Have we got any more Google news, Alan?
There is a little bit of Google news, yes. Their new Fuchsia OS has been recently updated. And Fuchsia is a weird animal. It's not Android and not Linux. It's a new operating system which has a UI now, and there's been some, we'll show in the show notes a link to an Ars Technica article where they've got some interesting screenshots. It's quite basic and shows some of the kind of basic building blocks of an operating system, like, window management and simple, very, very simple, wireframe applications, almost like cardboard cutout applications. They're not fully fleshed out, but it's really just, I think, as part of prototyping the underlying parts of Fuchsia, and the other bit I think they call Armadillo, which is the system UI. and all these new parts, which we're not quite sure, but we can speculate what they might be for. They might be replacement parts for Android, or they might be replacement parts for pieces of Android. Who knows?
It's interesting.
Yeah. Most of the information has basically been gleaned from README files so far. There's not really been any sort of official word from Google other than it's not a dumping ground.
I've been talking to some people who work in the embedded Linux space. And one of the things that they've been telling me is that the GPL is regarded as toxic in some of the embedded device manufacturers' opinions. And this is true for sort of white good manufacturers. And their opinion is that Fuchsia is actually intended to replace Android, but specifically to replace GPL licensed components. And some would say that the people that I've been talking to, it's not just their opinion, but a somewhat informed opinion. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Android, and if Fuchsia is just a skunkworks project, or if it's actually got an aspiration to replace Android and possibly Chrome OS at some point.
Wait and see.
Yes. In other non-Linux news, HP has managed to ship some laptops with a keylogger.
Oops.
Yes. So this was
isn't this like every laptop ever that ships out of some region that gets intercepted by these people in the government who...
No, this seems like it was software which they meant to install, but was doing something it shouldn't. This is a driver for some headphones, which monitors the keyboard for key presses and which it might want to respond to. But some code was left in the driver, which then takes all those key presses and writes them to a file, and then leaves the file there for any malicious program to have its way with.
Okay. I'm kind of relieved because I've actually just purchased an HP laptop.
Right. Well, if it has,
and I was concerned that this might be a hardware thing, but fortunately not. It looks like
it's the Connexent audio driver.
Fantastic. So yes, my HP laptop doesn't run Windows anymore. Surprisingly, it runs the best flavor of Ubuntu now. So I can sleep safe now.
Interesting. And have they responded and said why and how they're going to fix it? And
I think they've now released an update. Yes, I think they've fixed. They're releasing a fix through HP.com, but it sounds like they basically accidentally left in some debugging code.
That doesn't actually sound...
It wasn't actually meant to log keystrokes. Sure. It was just meant to... Yeah. I just kept it there by mistake.
I wonder how many laptops are actually not going to get this update, though.
That's certainly an interesting point, because as we'll find out in our next story, not everyone installs the latest security patches, Martin.
Shockingly, in WannaCry Ransomware Strikes Back Return of the Jedi... there's been a massive ransomware attack that has affected computers and individuals across the world, including our National Health Service. So I haven't been following this story very closely, but I do understand that just about everybody that runs Windows has had a problem over the last couple of weeks with their data being encrypted and being held to ransom, and Bitcoin payment being demanded in exchange for encryption keys. That just about sums it up, does it?
Not quite. It's not everyone. It seems to be mostly restricted to people running slightly older versions of Windows. And those older versions are often Windows XP. And some of them are desktop systems which just don't get updated because they have not had the funds to update them, or the motivation, or the hardware isn't up to it. Like, for whatever reason, these systems have not been updated. Now, the big annoyance for many people is that the patch was made available that would have prevented this potentially attacking these systems, but may not have been installed on all of them. And so some people were vulnerable, even though the software...
I think it was released in March, the patch. Although...
I heard that they actually prepared a patch for Windows XP as well for this, because they considered it so serious.
Well, because a lot of these systems that were attacked were Windows XP. And I even saw a photograph today of a piece of medical equipment running Windows XP that had the ransomware dialogue box.
How many years is it now since Windows XP was end of life? Is it like 3?
2001 it started, it was first out. So it's been around for a long, long time.
But they announced it was end of life, I think, in 2014. And I think they started to set people's expectations that it was going to be killed off like 18 months prior to that. So,
but we've known for many years that people are very sticky on Windows XP because it was, relatively a decent operating system compared to some of the ones that went before it. And so it was very sticky and people stayed on it for a very long time, especially given the ones that came after it weren't that good. So, yeah. So this story appears to be rolling and lots of finger pointing and blaming and stories of leaks from NSA, which are the tools that people have used to discover these issues. And so this will continue to roll on and
Go on, sorry, Mark.
One thing I found quite amusing was seeing the UK's health secretary questions about this and about the security of the NHS systems, and he was saying that they're very keen to launch an investigation to find out exactly why the attackers chose to attack the particular targets they did, which of course they chose to attack literally anyone they could.
Yes, the targets were anyone with an IP address and this open port. It's like dear. It's depressing, isn't it?
I was just thinking about our earlier story about applications being distributed through the Windows Store, and I was going to say that could potentially solve this problem, but I don't suppose it really does, because you're still required for people to actually go through the process of accepting the updates and applying them. Right,
and in corporate environments, they generally don't allow end users to update their systems. It's centrally managed, so yay. Is that the end of the news?
It is. And now it's time for a roundup of community news and no events this week. So first up, the Ubuntu desktop team have been discussing their plans for GNOME in Ubuntu 17.10.
Ooh, this is good, given loads of discussion in the media about what's going to happen with Ubuntu after the announcement a few weeks ago. So what did they come up with?
Yes.
It's not going to be stock GNOME by the looks of it. So we talked about how Mark had announced the GNOME implementation that was going to exist in Ubuntu, and it looks like it's going to be a little bit tweaked to ensure that it works well for our users.
That's good news, isn't it? I think
that's excellent news.
Yes, I mean, definitely.
The elephant in the room is a fair number of people have pointed out since this happened that the stock GNOME desktop is hideously unusable. Now, I realize that's a point of view that puts a slight on the GNOME developers and the GNOME design team and everyone who's done UX and development on GNOME, but it shouldn't. You need to suck up the fact that there are a lot of people who don't like the user interaction experience on Ubuntu, on GNOME. Now, fair enough, a lot of people don't like Unity, and that's fine. And a lot of people don't like Mate or whatever other desktop. Strange, weird people, I know. But we have a pretty large audience of users, like some millions of people run Ubuntu. And if we just wiped out Unity and said, here's your new desktop, and we know that the default experience isn't as fantastic as some people may think. So I think it's an excellent idea that we tweak it and make it more friendly for our users. I fully support that.
Whilst you might say that, not everything about the GNOME UI and experience is universally liked, they did have the foresight to include an extension system which enables you to augment pretty much anything about the desktop interface.
Absolutely.
And it's via that people can curate their own desktop experience.
Right. And that's
it's
something
good that exists.
That sets GNOME ahead of Unity, because Unity was, here is your experience and, like it or lump it. With the GNOME, it's, here is your experience and here's a website full of extensions that you can fiddle with that experience. And that makes it, in some ways, an order of magnitude better than Unity, because it allows people to customize that experience. I tried GNOME for about a month. Well, yeah, nearly a month. Mm-hmm. And I added loads of these extensions, and I wrote a blog post that listed all the extensions that I'd installed, and I asked other people to give me suggestions, and I tried them all, and I spent about a month on it, and then I got ultimately absolutely frustrated with the experience, and so I switched back to Unity. So right now I'm back on Unity on my 1604 system.
And there's an interesting point there as well, because one of the things that was discussed in this interview, this was an interview between Joey from OMG Ubuntu and Ken Van Dyne, who's on the desktop team, Canonical. And one of the things they discussed is, when you upgrade to 1710, what are you going to be left with? And it sounds like the plan at the moment is that you will acquire GNOME in that upgrade process, and it will become the default login desktop environment, but Unity will still be there, and you'll be able to choose that as an optional session to log into. So if you're having teething troubles, finding your way with the extensions that you like, you can go back to Unity if that's your preferred environment.
And you can log back into GNOME, and if you don't like it, go back to Unity and play around, and then maybe you'll read some blog posts that tell you, you can fix that usability quirk with this extension, or if you flick these switches in the tweak tool, and then you can switch back in. And that, I think, is a very great pragmatic way to deal with the, hey, we're moving your cheese problem.
And there was a follow-up article on OMG Ubuntu very quickly after that last one came out, and I urge everyone that's listening to go to OMG Ubuntu and find the post titled, "The Ubuntu Desktop Team Wants Your Feedback." So there's been some communication between Joey and the desktop team, and the desktop team have outlined a number of potential extensions that may or may not be shipped by default in GNOME in Ubuntu 17.10. And there's a very short survey on the OMG website where what they're asking you is, these are the extensions, this is what they do, rate the usefulness of this extension between 1 and 5. And this data will be fed back into the Ubuntu desktop team so they can make a data-driven decision about which of these extensions they should be including in the distribution by default. And there's also, rather amusingly, a vote on where the window control should be, either on the left or the right.
Obviously the left.
The middle, of course.
Right.
Some on the left, some on the right. So you have to move your mouse across the screen all the time.
What's important about that survey is this is your opportunity to have your say, to provide your input into the decision-making process. If you don't fill this survey out and the outcome isn't what you wanted, then you've got no recourse. So go there and cast your vote.
Well, do you have recourse anyway?
One thing that a lot of people will do is they will download the beta or the alpha or one of the ISOs from partway through the cycle before 17.10 is released finally, and often people will record their experience as a YouTube video. I would highly encourage people to grab snapshots throughout the cycle and grab it and test it and see if it's, see how well it works. See if the extensions that are installed by default are right. If the combination of extensions is a good one, and the tweaks that have been fiddled in the right way, because it's only once we have feedback from people who are actually using it that we can decide for certain which ones we're going to have in there on release day. So yes, the questionnaire is certainly, useful, but I would totally say people need to actually try it.
And I think the schedule is to intend to land GNOME in Alpha 2 of the 17.10 cycle. I don't imagine all of these extensions will be present at that point, but certainly you can test the desktop for fitness and purpose and reliability and file bugs for any reliability issues you encounter. Sweet. And it'll be interesting to see how it develops between Alpha 2 and Final.
Absolutely. Sweet. Also, in other news, the Open Store has had an app upgrade. So for those who don't know...
the Open Store?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that, Martin. The Open Store is an alternative store for Ubuntu Phone. Now, very soon, it won't be an alternative store. It will be the store for Ubuntu Phone. So basically, when the Ubuntu Phone was being developed, there was an official store run by Canonical. And then some community people developed an additional store which had different criteria for allowing applications in. So the Canonical store, both little c and big C, had some constraints on what would go in and what wouldn't go in, like security policy and so on. The Open Store was a bit more relaxed and pragmatic, and they allowed certain things in and changed some of the rules slightly. And so now that the phone has been announced as being no longer developed, that also means the phone store is being shut down. So the guys who've been working on the Open Store have done an update to the application, and it's had a visual refresh, and it looks great. It's really, really nice. I updated my BQ E4.5 and my BQ M10 and updated. I actually already had the Open Store installed on both of them, and the Open Store has a self-updater thing in it. The Open Store shows the Open Store within it. And so you could just click on the Open Store and it says, oh, there's an upgrade available, and you just press the upgrade button and it works. It's really, really nicely done. They've done really good work there. And then there's a whole bunch of other apps in there that I had never seen before, that are only in the Open Store and not in the original Ubuntu store. So
yeah, I'd seen some people uploading apps to the Open Store. Well, interesting. I wonder if UB Ports will be taking advantage of this.
So, Brian Douglas, who's one of the key developers of this, we're going to talk to him in next week's show. So listen out for that interview.
Cool. And finally, in the community news this week, there is a new Humble Indie bundle for you to buy. So this is, as usual, a bunch of indie games which are DRM free and all support Linux and are pay what you want. So there's, I think, 3 tiers depending on how much you want to pay for how many games. And at the moment, the top tier is just over 10 of your English pounds or 13 of your American dollars.
That seems good value. And are there any racing games in this bundle, Mark?
No comment.
Does that mean no? Am I going to be disappointed when I go?
It means I haven't looked in detail about what all the games are, but none of them immediately look like racing games.
That's the only question that matters.
But there are more games being announced in 5 days.
Oh, well. If you buy it now, do you get the extra games in the 5 days?
You do. As long as you pay the tier.
Right. If you pay the top tier. Okay.
Yeah, you have to beat the average.
No, not the top tier. There's multiple tiers, and currently the middle tier, I think, is like £5 or $7 or thereabouts. Yeah. And if you pay that amount, you will, in 5 days and 22 hours as we record this, get another game or more games or whatever the extra stuff they throw in. But
I shall be checking this out.
The top tier is $13. I bought it just before we started recording, so after we finish recording, I know what I'm going to be playing with. Lots and lots of games.
Excellent.
Awesome. And that's all for the community news this week.
Are you an alternative freedom hater? Thought so. We know you lot love Overcast. Cleanse your soul by giving each show a freedom-loving thumbs up in the app.
And that's all for episode 11. We'll be back next week when we'll be talking to Brian Douglas about UApp Explorer, and we'll bring you some command line love.
Yay! That was seamless, wasn't it?
Excellent.
That was a good one.
Yes.
He says modestly.
Yes. Well, we look forward to next week, Brian, and feedback and all lots of lovely stuff. See you next time.
Excellent. All right, see you next
Bye-bye.
time. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Get my joystick out now.